Now I'd like to touch a little bit more on some of these. The notion that the earth moves and not the sun. Here's just a little diagram showing you the orbit of the earth around the sun. And the speed of the earth is about 30 kilometers per second. That translates to about 67,500 miles per hour. You know, when we go at about 200, we shouldn't say this. I was going to say 200 kilometers, but that's, let's talk about miles. If we were to go in the car at 100 miles per hour, we would feel that we were going dangerously fast. Yet as we sit here, we're moving at about 67,500 miles per hour, and we don't feel it. When I was younger, I was sort of a little bit disturbed by astaghfirullah, but let me be honest with you. It caused me a little bit of a crisis, the Qur'an's discussion of this topic when I was a teenager. And here's just a little sort of lithograph or printout from one of the Muslim astronomy texts dated in the 14th century from an astronomer called Ibn Shatir. And he came up with a very nice way to explain the motions of Mercury and so on that I don't want to delve into. But the idea is that at this time, Muslim astronomers, by and large, like their European counterparts, held a geocentric view of the world, meaning they believed that the sun moved around the earth. And that was found in their diagrams and so forth. And when the Quran talked about the issue, it says that وَهُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ اللَّيْلَ وَالنَّهَارَ وَالشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ كُلٌّ فِي فَلَكٍ يَسْبَحُونَ. It is He who created the night and the day and the sun and the moon, all moving in space through a rounded course. And when I read this verse, I was saying, why is the Quran reinforcing this geocentric model? Is it so that the Muslims don't have a crisis of faith and say the Quran is false? Why doesn't the Quran come out and say that the sun stands still and the earth moves around the sun? Why is it talking about the sun moving the way that Muslims at that time and for a few centuries afterward used to think? And I really couldn't come to grips with it. And then finally, with a little bit more knowledge, things that scientists have known, for 50, 60, 70 years, I realize, of course, that the Quran is that there's no crisis there, that the crisis is my ignorance and not, astaghfirullah, that the Quran is making a mistake about natural science. And here's a diagram of the Milky Way galaxy, which is our galaxy. The sun is just an ordinary star about 2/3 of the way out in one of the spiral arms of the Milky Way. The Milky Way galaxy contains roughly 100 billion stars, and there are maybe on the order of 100 billion galaxies in the known universe. So people like to say, for example, that there are more stars in the known universe than grains of sand on all the world's beaches. It's an amazing amount. And it turns out that the sun actually rotates, it orbits the center of the galaxy, of our galaxy, where scientists think that there's a massive black hole. And this is another diagram showing the relative position of the sun within the Milky Way galaxy. And the sun is located, as I said, about 26,000 light years from the center of the galaxy. As you know, astronomers like to measure distance in light years. The amount of distance that it would be traveled by light in 1 year, because otherwise distances become too big to talk about. And 1 light year is about 6 trillion miles. And so we are about 26,000 light years away from the center of the galaxy. And our sun orbits the center of the galaxy at a speed of 200 kilometers per second. That's about 450,000 miles per hour compared to a much smaller speed of the Earth of 67,000 miles per hour. So indeed, the sun does move through space precisely as the Quran says. And knowing these facts, and next time we read the verse, we pause and we say, Subhanallah, this is remarkable. It's another very interesting verse. Surah At-Takwir. إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ. That's how the surah begins. And I've put some of the translations here that Yusuf Ali translates it, when the sun with its spacious light is folded up, when the sun is overthrown, Other people have translated it both in Arabic and English, when the sun will be darkened. For example, in Al-Tabari's translation quoted by Ibn Kathir, says this means that when the sun will be darkened. Other contemporaries and companions and so on have said that kuwirat means it will sink in. Most people say that it will be some version of the sun going dark. This troubled me as well, because if you look at the word kuwirat in Arabic dictionaries, what does kuwirat mean? Kura means like a ball or a sphere. Kuwirat usually means that you have taken something and made it round, and usually made it bigger and round. So for example, if you look in Lisan al-Arab, sort of authoritative Arabic dictionary, they give an example of kawar al-imma. He took the turban and he wrapped it around the head so that it became nice and big and round. That's how it's typically used. It's only when people quote the Quranic verse that they say, well, there's an alternate meaning, that it's also darkened or somehow shrouded or wrapped up in something. And of course, we sit and we think, well, how else could people of the 6th century or 7th century or 11th century interpret such a verse? There's no other way to really comprehend the verse. But then we look at what we have learned, in the last 50 years about stellar evolution, and we look at the meaning from, for example, Al-Mawrid dictionary, that kawar means to roll and enlarge, to ball up, to conglomerate, to agglomerate. Meanings that in the sort of straightforward sense don't have anything to do with darkening the sun. It's balling it up and rolling it, making it bigger and rounder. And then we see that stellar evolution tells us that what's going to happen to our sun is that here's where the sun is right now in its sort of prime of its life. And as it exhausts the hydrogen that it burns at its core, and that's changed to helium, we expect that the sun will grow and enlarge to what is known as a red giant star. Okay? So indeed, إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ, when the sun is balled up and enlarged, right? This will be the sort of final movement in the symphony of the sun's life before it exhausts itself and becomes a white dwarf. And here's another sort of comparative picture of the sun in its prime and the sun as a red giant star. And so when we read this, all of a sudden we have a very, very different way to understand this verse. Can I stand here before you and say, well, this is clearly what this verse means in the Quran, that it's talking about a red giant star? No, I don't consider it a quote-unquote proof verse, but it's an appreciation issue. That all of a sudden, a new window of appreciation is open to us about the profoundness of the Quran and the way that it sort of gives hints, and that those who have enough knowledge can all of a sudden capture the hint and say, oh my goodness, this is amazing, this is remarkable. And those who don't know shrug their shoulders and move on. And a very interesting thing, if you read about 3-4 verses more in Surah At-Takwir, where we were talking about إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ, and it also says, وَإِذَا الْبِحَارُ سُجِّرَتْ. So they say make lectures interactive so people don't get bored. So what does that mean? Who wants to be interactive? إِذَا الْبِحَارُ سُجِّرَتْ.
Will there become fire?
Yes, right? When the oceans boil over probably would be the single best English translation, right? So it's a very, very interesting couplet, because when the sun becomes a red giant, it will grow to 100 times its current size, roughly, and God knows best, these are scientific estimates. Its outer horizon will burn the Earth's atmosphere. All life as we know it will come to an end. And of course, with that sort of heat, the oceans will boil over and eventually evaporate. So it's a very, very interesting dynamic that the Quran is painting for us here.